I bring to you my Writer's Journey series. Today is Writer's Journey Episode 1, The Phantom Manuscript. I'm so excited to talk to you about my journey as a writer, my goals as a writer. I'm titling Episode 1, The Phantom Manuscript, not only as an homage to Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, but also because as a writer, I have worked on so many stories and manuscripts over the years, and yet I have no published books, so I thought it would be appropriate. I thought for the first writer's journey, it would be fun to talk about my background and my history with writing, because I have had so much fun writing so many stories as I've grown up. As a kid, I enjoyed writing a lot of science fiction stories. I read a lot of science fiction. I was actually a member of the science fiction book club growing up. It was a service in which every month you get the catalog in the mail, and by default they had one or two books that you would end up getting for the month, or you could pick other books. And of course, you got free books or discounted books when you signed up. They had some crazy deals back in the day, something like a penny each or $1 each or so many free. So I think when I signed up, it was something like buy one, get 5 free or something. And of course, they hooked you into the club and you kept buying more books. It was a clever strategy. But I have an admission to make all these years later. As a kid, I was probably, more than 8 years old. Probably 10 years old. Yeah, somewhere around 10 years old when I signed up for Science Fiction Book Club. And I saw what a great deal it was and how I could get these books so cheap. They had a referral program to sign up more people. So I was going around trying to convince people to join the book club. And I got very frustrated. I probably convinced a couple of friends to join, but I couldn't convince my family members to join. I was like, come on, Mom, let me sign you up for this thing. So the bad thing that I did as a 10-year-old was I signed up my cat for the Science Fiction Book Club. Oh gosh, I must have been more than 10 if I had the cat, because my parents didn't let me have a cat till I was a teenager. So, oh gosh, that's even worse. I must have been 13 or 14 at the time. So, as a 14-year-old, I signed up my cat for the Science Fiction Book Club, and I got the free books for referring my cat, and my cat got the nice deal joining the club, getting the discounted books again. And the really funny thing that happened with that, my cat that I had then, her name was Leia. I called her Princess, but she was Princess Leia. Over time, I did not know this, but the Science Fiction Book Club ended up selling or giving out our information to people because I got a credit card offer in the mail for my cat, Leia. And I thought that was really funny, but I wasn't going to commit credit card fraud. I didn't fill out the credit card offer for my cat or anything. But I knew at that point that the Science Fiction Book Club had given other people our private information because there was nothing else in the world that had my cat's name and address on it, as if my cat was a human being. I also thought it was really funny that the credit card company had pre-approved my cat for a certain amount. I don't remember what it was, $500 or $1,500, or maybe it was thousands of dollars for this credit card. Who knows back in the day. But yes, I showed that to my parents and laughed about it and threw it away, of course, because it's one thing to rip off the Science Fiction Book Club and get a few extra discounted or free books as a child. It's another thing to commit credit card fraud. Oh, what fun I had back in the day. I don't know why I eventually stopped the Science Fiction Book Club, but I told you all of that just to tell you that as a kid, I wrote a lot of science fiction stories, and I had these books that were basically Star Trek fan fiction, but not fan fiction in the sense of using the characters from the TV show. I used the universe, the idea of Starfleet and the spaceships, and I had my own characters on their own ship going on their own adventures. My adventures were the kind of Starfleet crew and ship fighting space pirates most of the time, and I had this super villain that was Shadow Man, who was the leader of the space pirates. And it's really funny to me looking back at those days because I actually had some well fleshed out bad guys as characters. He had a mother, he had some serious motives, he had best friends friends that were part of the story. Like, there were multiple people in his space pirate crew who also had personalities and went along with him. His mother, when he wasn't there, decided to build a robot version of him, so there was a Robo Shadow Man as well. And my crew was a bunch of fleshed out characters, though I named them after people I knew, family members, friends, and I just borrowed personalities from real life to put into that in order to, I guess, make it easy as a young writer to put those stories together. They were a lot of fun to write, but, you know, something that a kid would write, nowhere near something publishable. I also built the characters and their stuff out of Lego. I made a set that, using one of the base plates, that looked kind of like a Star Trek bridge. Basically, I created my own action figures for the story using Lego. Over the years, of course, I don't have all of those old files. I wrote a lot of it by hand. Once I was old enough that we actually got a computer, I did type some of it up, but a lot of those files were lost. I do have files from high school on. I did manage to back up a lot of those. When I was in middle school, I shifted gears and I wrote a novel that was based on a utopia, because we studied utopias in middle school. And it was called Lunar Utopia, about people living a perfect life on the moon. And I love talking about it because it's probably the worst thing that I have ever written. My friends who read it complained. I really embraced the utopia concept, and I made it a perfect society in which there were no problems. And you need conflict in your stories. So it was horrible in the sense that these people were really happy. They were really happy people, and all of them got along, and there were no problems. And so it was horrible to read, because you don't want to read these boring stories about people who wake up every day and greet each other real happy and don't argue with each other, that sometimes you have to let go. You have to let go of your old characters and let go of your old stories and move on to something else. And I was glad that I learned that lesson. In college, I wrote what I think are actually some really great, really fun stories. I focused more on real modern settings, more coming of age stories in which characters were learning who they were and how to interact with the world. I had one of my favorite really novellas that I wrote was called Great Gifts, and it was about a guy who worked at a bookstore and he didn't get along with his mom and his family, and the thing that he desired most in the world was to get a car. He saw having a car as the true embodiment of freedom, that if he could just afford to buy his own car, he could go where he wanted and do what he wanted to do. And of course, by the end of the story, he has to learn that that's not really how the world works, and that there's a lot more to growing up and being free out in the world than just having a car. He ended up getting his job at the mall and working at the gift store and encountering all these crazy people, and really a lot of it was based on the fact that as a teenager, I had a job at a party store and then at a Hallmark store at the mall. So I took a lot of stories from real life, funny customers and strange things that happened, and also stories that my friends told me, and kind of mixed them together into this fictional reality. And that was fun. I've written a lot of drafts of manuscripts over the years. I wrote stories like Murderous Me, which was about a guy who was a murderer and someone was murdered, and everyone assumed that he did it. But he was trying to be a better person. He met a girl, and it was that idea that once he met this girl, she made him a better person, and he was trying to be a better person, and he wasn't killing people anymore, and he wasn't actually responsible for the murder. I experimented with different ideas like that and had a lot of fun writing those stories. I also wrote Star Wars stories. I had my own characters I created in the Star Wars universe and put them in fun situations. Recently, I wrote a fantasy novel, and I really liked it. It's really more in novella form, but after I set it aside and thought about the concept more as a writer, I started doubting things and decided that I would prefer for the story to take place in a different order, change some stuff up with characters. I was in a situation as I was heading into November of 2020 in which I was like, well, I've got this fantasy story, but I want to rework it. And then Nanowrimo hit, and Nanowrimo was an awesome experience this year as I was working with a collection of short stories, and I realized that one of those short stories could really be its own novel concept. And so I started the collection of short stories, set it aside, kind of paused it. I fleshed out 60 pages of this novel, and then I went ahead and outlined the rest of the novel and thought of concepts for potential sequels even. And then I went back to the short story collection. With NaNoWriMo, I'm very happy to say I've got a short story collection, and I've got the beginning and outline of a modern story. It is a coming of age story with a guy that works at a used bookstore. Funny thing, when I was a kid, I'd illegally underage worked at a used bookstore. I'd kind of forgotten that part of my life, and it just occurred to me when I was coming up with the short story ideas. I was like, what are some random, maybe odd, quirky things? And my brain remembered, oh yeah, I worked underage and was paid cash to work at the store. And I thought about how fun that is, and it reminded me of the novellas that I wrote in college, Great Gifts and that sort of thing. And I was like, I think there's a lot there that I can work with. So now I'm torn between what do I try to publish? Do I try to publish fantasy? Do I try to publish science fiction? Do I try and publish these coming of age mystery stories? And I know that it makes a big difference. So in my writer's journey, I feel like the biggest question that I need to answer first is, what genre do I want to be connected with? I feel like probably the easiest for me to write and publish would be the modern coming of age stories. But I love science fiction and fantasy so much that I think it's possible to be a writer who's known for publishing both sci-fi and fantasy and actually linking them together. Like the classic fantasy was often linked to science fiction, and like Brandon Sanderson has done, where he says he's got a Cosmere, he's writing fantasy stories now, but they will evolve into science fiction. And you can see those sci-fi planetary elements already built into it. So it's rough. And I know the advice from a lot of people is use different pen names or that sort of thing. But I'm not sure. So that's what I'm reflecting upon this month as we start 2021. And then as a bonus, I also have a side project in which one of my favorite people in the world has asked me to do a collaboration project. And so I have been very happy to explore this collaborative project and start writing out stuff for that as well. I've got decisions to make. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of my writer's journey. Every day is a good day for talk about a writer's journey or a book talk. Peace.